everyone, so I'm going to start reading chapter 7 of the story now of Tom's Midnight Garden. If you remember in chapter 6 there had been a big storm and a tree had fallen down, but the next time that Tom had gone back into the garden, the clock was still stood there. The clock? No, the tree. The clock, we'll get onto the clock in a minute. The tree was still stood there as if it hadn't been struck by lightning at all, so he was a bit confused about that. So next chapter is called Report to Peter, and you can see why I'm talking about clocks in a minute. So, not unless you put the clock back, Uncle Alan said carelessly in answer to Tom's last question. Tom doodled with his pen in the corner of the letter that he was writing to Peter, a clock dial, which he then enclosed at the top of a tall rectangular case, a grandfather clock in fact. He took some minutes to complete it, and then he addressed his uncle again. What clock? What did you say, Tom? You said a tree could not be lying fallen at one time and then be standing up again as if it was before it fell unless you put the clock back. What clock? Oh, no particular clock. Tom scribbled out his sketch of the grandfather clock. It's just a saying, Tom, to put the clock back. It means to have the past again, and no one can have that. Time isn't like that. His uncle returned to his reading, and Tom began doodling in another part of the writing paper. After some time he found out that he'd drawn the shape of an angel-like creature with wings from its shoulders and straddling legs. He'd drawn the creature before he was aware, and then was startled at his own handiwork. He couldn't think at once where the design had come into his mind, and then he remembered that it belonged to the grandfather clock, and he scribbled that out too. Then what is time like, Uncle Alan? Asked Tom. His uncle put his book down altogether, and his aunt nervously put down her mending too. Tom, she said, you shouldn't always be asking such very odd questions of your uncle. He's tired after a day's work. No, Gwen. A child's questions should certainly be answered. All I would object to Tom's questions is their lack of connection and sometimes seriousness too. Look at his first question. He asked whether it would be possible to go through a door. He actually asked how it would be possible. Well, cried Tom's aunt with a relief that came from her not having paid attention to the earlier conversation. Well, that seems a very sensible idea. So sensible it's almost silly. Alan Kitson raised his eyebrows, and his wife went on hurriedly. You know what I mean. Going through a door is an everyday happening. Not when the door is shut. Then Tom went on to ask about the invisibility of a person like himself. Oh, well, sometimes in fairy stories, Aunt Gwen began. Tom shook his head indignantly. And finally, his uncle continued, we have this question about a tree being able to lie fallen one day and then on another day against all known laws of nature. It was a dream, interrupted Aunt Gwen. Just a strange dream, wasn't it, Tom? No, it wasn't, Tom cried passionately. It was real. Indeed, said Uncle Alan with slow relish. So this tree really existed. This extraordinary incident has really happened. Tell us where, Tom, and when. Where and when, Tom? Tom remained silent. He dug his pen in a row of inky holes down the side of the paper. Come on, Tom. It was a fairy tree, said Aunt Gwen, returning with desperate playfulness to her first suggestions. Goblin woodcutters laid it low, didn't they, Tom? Uncle Alan smiled and picked up his book again. Oh, I'm inclined to think you're right after all, Gwen. It fell in a storm, Tom said in a strangled voice. Lightning struck it. He looked at his uncle, as if he would willingly have seen him struck in the same manner. His aunt intercepted the look and saw her husband's mouth opening to speak. She rushed in the conversation again, and this time won. And now, Tom mustn't speak again until he's finished his letter to Peter, nor must he be interrupted. So Tom went back to his letter, cramping his writing between the doodlings and the stab marks. All I have to tell you is it's true, he wrote, about the door and being invisible in the fir tree. It's all very strange, but I don't mind any of it, except perhaps being invisible to everybody. For instance, there are 3 boys that come into the garden. Their names are Hubert and James and Edgar. Edgar is about my age, but I think I would like James better. There's a girl who tags around with them. She's very young, and she's called like Hattie or something. Without appearing to detach his attention from the book, Uncle Alan spoke. It's useless to write at length to anyone recovering from the measles. After measles, the patient had to be particularly careful not to strain his eyes by overuse. If Tom's letter's too long for Peter, then no doubt his mother will read it aloud to him, said Gwen. In alarm, Tom wrote private in the biggest capitals across the top of the letter, folded it intricately and wrote Peter private on both sides. He had to undo it again to sign it, haven't forgotten that in a panic. He then put the letter into an envelope, addressed it and wrote confidential on the top left-hand side of the corner. He found his uncle's eyes watching him ironically over the top of the book. Tom felt defiant. He licked the flap of the envelope and pressed it down, and then he drew the outline of the long tomcat across the edge of the stuck-down flap. Like a seal, it guarded against any tampering. Beneath the cat, Tom wrote B-A-R, burn after reading. Uncle Alan brought out his wallet. Here's a stamp for your precious letter. Tom thanked him stiffly. The letter finished, Tom had nothing more to do. He composed himself to wait patiently for bedtime. There was no real use going into bed early. He couldn't go down to the garden anyway until his aunt and uncle were in bed and asleep. His thoughts ran on the garden, as they always did nowadays. He reflected how dangerously near he had been to betraying it just now. Fortunately, his aunt and uncle had only laughed at him. If they'd been more attentive and sympathetic, he might have been trapped into telling them some more. They might have found out his secret. The very next time he visited the garden, they would have insisted upon going with him. Tom went chill at the idea. Are you feeling quite well, Tom? Asked his aunt. Yes, thank you, Aunt Gwen. Nevertheless, she fetched a thermometer and made him put it in his mouth. You were shivering just now as if you had a chill. Tom shook his head. Oh, I hope it's not the onset of the measles for your sake, Tom. It would mean you staying away from home several weeks longer, perhaps, instead of only 10 days. She withdrew the thermometer and took it over to the light. Only 10 days, repeated Tom. Oh, I know you must be longing to get home, said Aunt Gwen sadly. She would have liked him to have stayed much longer. Uncle Alan was saying nothing. Only 10 days. Only 10 more days for the garden. I think perhaps I have a temperature, and it is measles, said Tom. Surely, even with measles, he could go down every night to the garden during those extra weeks while the disease ran its course. I can never find the thread of mercury at first, Aunt Gwen was saying. She twisted and turned the thermometer, and then at last she held it still. No, Tom, you've got no temperature. You've got no measles. Oh, that's a relief for you, isn't it? Home soon. But, yes, Tom. He dared not say that, and suddenly he found that he did not want to go home. He wanted above all to stay here where he could visit the garden. His home now seemed a long, long, misty way away. Even Peter was a remote boy with whom he could only correspond by letter and never play. The boys nearer to him now were Hubert and James and Edgar, James especially. There had been a girl too, but she's just a girl. He didn't want to play with her. What had her name been? Hattie? I've got a feeling in the next chapter you might be meeting somebody. Okay, see you later, guys. Bye.